The basket arrived before the warships did. 14 kinds of fruit from 14 star systems, packed in something that looked like woven glass and smelled like a garden trying too hard. A card sat on top. Formal lettering, council script, already translated by the time it reached Ji-yeon's desk. A gesture of welcome on the occasion of Earth's formal invitation to join the Galactic Governance Framework. She set the card down. She picked up the document beneath it. She read it once. Then she read the second paragraph again. Then she took a red pen, a physical ink and barrel red pen because some things deserve to be done by hand, and she circled 2 words. Corrective action. She had seen those words before. Different alphabet, different century, same meaning. She set the pen down and sat with the fruit basket and the silence for a long time. The broadcast went out at 0600 Earth Standard. Every screen on every human-inhabited world lit up the same way. A slow fade from black to the image of Overlord Vethus, Supreme Commander of the Galactic Council, standing at a podium carved from a material that didn't exist in the solar system. He was tall, 4-armed, old in the way that mountains are old, not fragile, just permanent. He spoke for 11 minutes. His translators were good. His tone was the tone of a man explaining to a tenant that the building had new management. Earth had 60 days to submit its formal agreement to council governance. After 60 days, a guidance fleet would arrive to assist in the transition. 5,000 ships. The word guidance was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Ji-yeon watched the broadcast from a conference room in Geneva. When it ended, the room broke into noise. Voices climbing over each other, hands going up, tablets being slammed on tables. She didn't move. She sat for 40 seconds counting them, while the room came apart around her. Then she stood up and walked out. Nobody stopped her. People made room without knowing they were doing it. Junho got the call at 700. He was at his kitchen table in Busan, drinking cold coffee and watching the harbor, which he did every morning because the harbor didn't ask anything of him. The call was 3 sentences. He listened to all 3. Then he said, "How long do I have to pack?" They told him. "I'll be there in 6 hours," he said. He poured the cold coffee out. He didn't make a fresh cup. He went and found his uniform at the back of the closet where he'd put it when he decided he was done with uniforms, and he held it for a moment, not looking at anything in particular, and then he put it on. He didn't look at the picture on the nightstand. He'd learned not to do that before certain kinds of days. Mireille hadn't moved from her desk in 31 hours. This was not new. The coffee rings on her blueprints had coffee rings of their own. She had a cot in the corner of her lab that she used the way other people use coffee, not for rest, just to keep the machine running. Her team had stopped asking her to go home 2 years ago. They'd stopped 3 months in, actually, when they understood that home was a concept she had temporarily shelved. She watched the broadcast on a small screen in the upper corner of her lab. She didn't stop working while she watched it. When it ended, she made a note in the margin of the schematic in front of her. 4 numbers, a small calculation, and kept going. She had been ready for this for 3 years. Not prepared, ready. The difference mattered to her. The Global Assembly session lasted 4 minutes. Not because they agreed on everything. They never agreed on everything. 4 minutes, because for the first time since the Assembly existed, every faction, every political bloc, every geographic coalition, every old grievance and new alliance was angry at exactly the same thing. The vote was unanimous. In the hallway after, a junior diplomat leaned over to a senior one and said, "I've never seen them all agree on anything." The senior diplomat looked down the hallway where Ji-yeon was walking away, red pen still in her hand. "They didn't agree," she said. "They just all felt the same thing at the same time. That's different." Ji-yeon wrote Earth's official reply that night, and she wrote it alone. She didn't ask for input. She was not the kind of person who asked for input on things she had already decided. The reply was 3 sentences long. The first sentence acknowledged receipt of the council's message. The second sentence was in Korean, not translated. The council's translation AI flagged it. Grammatical anomaly detected. Contextual meaning unclear. Please provide standard equivalent. She declined. There was no standard equivalent. It was an old expression, the kind that had no direct translation because it came from a specific kind of experience that other languages hadn't needed a word for yet. It meant, roughly, "We have buried better than you, and we kept going." The third sentence confirmed that Earth would provide its response within the specified time frame. She read it once. She sent it. Then she sat back and looked at the fruit basket which she had carried with her from Geneva for reasons she didn't examine too closely. She took one of the fruits, small, purple, smelled like metal and honey, and she bit into it. It was good, actually. That bothered her more than she expected. 3,000 kilometers above the orbital plane of Saturn, the first Council ships dropped out of faster-than-light transit. Then more after that, steady as breathing, until the sensor feeds from Earth's outer monitoring stations looked like someone was counting stars, and the stars were arriving too fast to count. 5,000 ships in formation, in no hurry. Junho watched the data feed from a room deep inside USEF Command that smelled like recycled air and old decisions. Wu Jin stood beside him, young enough that the scale of what they were seeing hadn't yet translated into the right feeling. 60 days, Wu Jin said. Junho looked at the numbers, the tonnage, the formation pattern, the way the fleet moved, front-heavy parade formation, the arrangement of something that expected to be seen and found impressive. 40, he said. They're impatient. They always are. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a cigarette he had quit 15 years ago, lit it. Somewhere behind him, someone opened a window. The Council fleet crossed Jupiter's orbit at 0300 and found nothing. No defense grid, no patrol ships, no warning buoys, no weapons platforms, no sign that the species living in the inner system had noticed 5,000 warships closing in at a steady, unhurried pace. The outer planets sat in the dark the way they always had, cold, quiet, minding their own business. Commander Pralith ran the long-range sensors twice, then a third time. Nothing, his tactical officer said. Pralith looked at the screen, looked at the empty space where Earth's documented defense network was supposed to be. He was a careful man. He had made a career out of being careful, which was why Vathis kept him close, and why the absence of what should have been there bothered him in a way he didn't have a clean word for. It was like walking into a room and knowing, without being able to say how, that someone had rearranged the furniture. "Keep scanning," he said. Overlord Vethis watched the feed from the front of the command deck and felt something he had not felt in a long time: satisfaction. The empty space ahead of them meant one thing to him. The species had looked at 5,000 ships and done the math. Good. That was how it was supposed to work. That was the entire point of the fleet, of the formation, of the deliberate, visible crossing of every waypoint on the approach. Not destruction, demonstration. The Council didn't want to fight. Fighting was expensive. Demonstration was cheap. He had done this 23 times across his career. A show of force. A moment of understanding, surrender, integration. Then the paperwork. Earth would be number 24. He clasped two of his four hands behind his back and watched Jupiter grow larger on the screen. Wu Jin was running the numbers for the 11,000th time. Not because he was unsure, he was very sure. He had been sure since the third time through, and the 11,000th run came out to exactly the same result as the first, which was the point. Precision was a form of respect for the plan, for the people executing it, for the ones who wouldn't be coming back. He ran the numbers because they deserved to be right. He looked across the command room at Junho. Junho was watching the sensor feed with the kind of stillness that wasn't peace. It was the stillness of a full glass filled right to the rim, not spilling because it hadn't been touched yet. "They're reading clear space and calling it victory," Wu Jin said. "Let them," Junho said. The asteroid belt was quiet. It was always quiet out there, rocks and dust and the slow, cold drift of things that had been circling the sun since before anything on Earth had learned to want anything. But the quiet was different now. There were shapes in it that hadn't been there 2 years ago, tucked into gaps between rocks, pressed flat against the dark side of tumbling boulders. You cooled to background radiation temperature so that no sensor sweep would find anything worth noting. 112 weapons platforms. Mireille had spent 14 months on the cooling systems alone. The problem wasn't building a platform that could fire. The problem was building one that could wait, perfectly invisible, perfectly patient, until it was told to stop waiting. Heat was the enemy. Heat was the thing that got you seen. She had solved the heat problem the way she solved most problems, which was to refuse to accept that it couldn't be solved and then work until it wasn't. She sat at her station inside Titan Base and watched the Council fleet cross the midpoint between Jupiter and the Belt. She had a cup of coffee going cold beside her keyboard. She didn't drink it. She didn't notice it. Her hands were on the panel, waiting. Preleth felt it again, the furniture moved feeling. He pulled up the geological survey data for the asteroid belt. Old data, public data, the kind the Council had gathered during first contact missions. He compared it to his current sensor readings. Small differences. Density variations that didn't quite line up. Thermal signatures flattened to almost nothing, but not nothing. Not quite. The kind of thing that looked like sensor noise if you wanted it to. He did not want it to. "Vethus," he said. His voice came out careful. "Hey, Preleth. Something is wrong with the belt." Vethus looked at him. Vethus had 4 eyes and 2 centuries on Preleth, and every one of those years was in the look he gave now. Not dismissal exactly, something closer to patience. The patience of a man who had been through 23 of these and understood that there was always a nervous officer who saw a threat in geology. "Continue approach," Vethus said. Preleth looked at his screen. He said nothing. He felt the furniture sitting wrong in the room around him and said nothing. Junho watched the fleet cross the threshold he had marked on his screen 3 weeks ago with a single red line and no label. He waited 2 more minutes. Old habit. Wait longer than you think you need to. The enemy is always where they were 2 minutes ago. Then he looked at the screen where Mireille's channel sat open. "Light them up, Mireille," he said. 4 words. She hit the panel. The asteroid belt opened, not all at once. Sequence timed, staggered, platform by platform in the exact order Mireille had calculated would collapse the fleet's ability to turn and mass in any useful direction before the second wave hit. The first 6 platforms fired before Vethus's fleet registered that anything had changed. By the time the alarm systems were screaming on the lead ships, 30 platforms were running hot, and the first Council destroyer was breaking apart along its port seam. The belt lit up like something buried in the rock had finally decided to breathe. Preleth didn't say anything. He watched his tactical screen fill up with the kind of data he had no practiced response for, and he stood very still with his hands at his sides. He had been right about the furniture. It hadn't been rearranged. It had been aimed at the door. Ji-Yin watched the engagement feed from Earth orbit aboard a monitoring station. The visual was distant. The belt was far enough that it looked, from here, like a slow light show, orange and white blooms popping silently in the dark. Wu Jin's voice came over the comm. "They're surprised." "No," she said. She watched another bloom spread across the tactical map. "Surprised is what you are when you spill coffee." She let the next thing go unsaid. She didn't need to say it. The feed said it. She turned back to her screen and began drafting the next document. Outside the station window, the light show continued, patient and unhurried, like someone had decided to count the Council ships and was doing it one by one. The pods hit all 3 destroyers at 0412. They came in fast and low, shaped like teeth, built from a ceramic alloy that could punch through 2 inches of hull plating and seal itself on the other side before the atmosphere could bleed out. The Council had used them for 40 years. They were very good at their job. In 40 years of deployment across 9 systems and 23 integration actions, they had never met a ship that was waiting for them. Destroyer Hanwell 7 took 2 pods on the port side, midsection, within 8 seconds of each other. The first one punched through at junction 14C, between the engine room and the crew corridor. The second one hit 11A, near the weapons bay. Natale was standing 12 feet from the second breach point when the pod hit. He already had his rifle up. He had done this 17 times before. Not simulated, not drilled. 17 real boardings on 7 different ships across 3 years of close action patrols on the Mars perimeter, back when the perimeter was something that needed defending, and nobody in the outer system slept well. He knew the sound, the specific compressed air punch of a hull breach, then the hiss. Then the clang of the pod shell folding back, then the half second where nothing happened before they came through. He used that half second. Council soldiers were tall, 7 feet, ceramic armor over a body built for the kind of low-gravity environments that let you get big without the structural cost. They came through the breach in a practiced stack. First man wide, second man right, third man clearing high. It was textbook entry, clean, professional. The corridor was narrow. Their formation required space they didn't have. Tail put the first one down before he cleared the breach entirely. The second one got 3 steps. The third one saw what was happening and did something Teal respected, made a fast, correct read of the situation and tried to pull back. He didn't make it. The corridor fight lasted 11 minutes. When it was done, Tail's 6-person team held the ship. He filed a damage report within the hour. He noted a dented wall panel near Junction 11A, caused by the Second Council soldier going down hard against it. He requested a replacement panel. The part about the 11-minute fight was in a separate report, filed under a different category. Pralith received the helmet cam data at 0500. He sat down to review it the way he always reviewed after-action footage, tablet in hand, posture straight. The professional discipline of a man who had seen violent things and understood that seeing them clearly was part of the job. He watched 12 seconds. He stopped the feed. He set the tablet down on his console and looked at the far wall of his command room for a while. He was not a man who frightened easily. He had earned his rank on 3 campaigns. He had stood on the bridge of a ship that was on fire and given clear orders while the fire got closer. He understood violence. He understood the grammar of it, the way force worked, the way bodies moved, the things soldiers looked like when they were doing their jobs. His soldiers, in that footage, did not look like that. They looked like men who had opened a door expecting a room and found something else behind it, something that didn't reorganize their tactics, something that reorganized their understanding of what the word threat had meant up until 12 seconds ago. He had seen that look once before. On a young soldier in his first campaign, the first time the boy had encountered real combat. His veterans had that look now. He did not restart the footage. He closed the file. He sat in the quiet of his command room and thought about the empty belt that had turned out not to be empty, and the defense grid that had turned out to be somewhere else, and the species that had looked at 5,000 ships and not flinched. He thought about the furniture. Mireille watched the boarding engagement data roll in from her station and felt something she didn't have a clean name for. Not satisfaction. Satisfaction was too simple. It was closer to the feeling of a very long calculation finally balancing. Not joy, not relief, just the recognition that the numbers she had carried in her head for 3 years were correct. She had built the platforms. She had rigged the corridor sensors on every destroyer in the fleet to feed directly to her station. She had spent 14 months on cooling systems and 3 months on breach response protocols and 6 months arguing with a committee about whether the breach response protocols were necessary. The committee had eventually agreed with her. She made a small note in her log. Labeled it C, I told you. Then she went back to the tactical feed and updated her projection models for the next 12 hours because the boarding attempt meant Vethis was losing his patience, which meant the next move would be faster and less organized than the last one, which meant the geometry was about to change. She liked it when the geometry changed. It gave her something to work with. At 0630, a council emergency frequency crackled open on Junho's console. It wasn't scrambled. It wasn't routed through an intermediary. It was direct. Vethis to Junho. One line. No preamble. In standards so clear it sounded like it had been rehearsed. What are your soldiers? Not who. Not how many. What? Junho heard the difference. He sat with the question for a moment. He thought about the Mars siege, which he thought about every day whether he wanted to or not. The 2 years of it, the things they had done to survive it, the shape they had been in when it ended. He thought about the report he kept in a locked file that he had never showed anyone, not because it was classified, but because some documents existed to be carried, or not shared. He thought about the list of names on the wall of the Busan Memorial that he visited every year on the same date and stood in front of for exactly as long as it took. Humans, he said. He closed the channel. The tally at 0900 was 340 council ships destroyed or disabled. Wu Jin pulled the numbers without ceremony, cross-referenced them against the projections, checked the casualty column on Earth's side, and wrote it all down in the log with the same handwriting he used for supply requests. Some numbers were just witness. They didn't need a reaction. They needed to be right and recorded and carried forward. He closed the log, Junho was still sitting at his console, the dead comm line still open in front of him, looking at the word he had said to Vethis like it was the only answer to every question the universe had ever asked. Humans. It had felt saying it like something very old and very heavy. Not a boast, just a fact. The Council fleet was not retreating. That was the important thing, and Vethis understood it even as his formation collapsed and his ships pulled away from the engagement in every direction that looked like open space. He told himself this because it was, technically, true. He had not given a retreat order. He had given a regroup order, which was a different thing. A retreat was a decision. What was happening to his fleet right now was not a decision, it was a discovery. The discovery was this: every direction that looked like open space wasn't. Junho's second formation had been sitting dark and silent at the system's edge for 11 days. Not attacking, not signaling, just sitting. The way a door sits in a frame, present, patient, functional in a way that only becomes obvious when you try to walk through it. The Council ships that pulled toward the outer system found the formation waiting for them, not charging, not threatening, simply there, in a configuration that blocked every clean exit corridor without firing a single shot. The ones that turned back toward the inner system ran into Mirai's second wave from the belt. They were not being destroyed, they were being sorted. Mirai called it geometry. She had a whiteboard in her lab covered in trajectory arcs and intercept points, and she had been staring at it for so long that the lines were burned into the back of her eyes. The Council fleet moved the way all large fleets moved: mass, momentum, vectors that took time to change. She had spent 6 months studying every recorded Council engagement from the last 2 centuries. She knew how they thought. She knew which directions they preferred, which formations they defaulted to under pressure, which moves they made when they were in trouble. Vethis tried the counter-thrust at 1,100, 800 ships mid-fleet, driving toward the gap between Mirai's belt platforms and Junho's outer formation. She didn't stop it. She redirected it. She used 3 platforms to push the thrust sideways, not head-on, just nudging the momentum, the way you'd redirect a river with a well-placed berm rather than a dam. The 800 ships pushed hard and ended up 2 degrees off their intended line, which was fine, except that 2 degrees off over the distance involved put 4 of them inside the gravity envelope of a rogue planetoid that Mirai had flagged on her survey maps 3 months ago. Not destroyed, just stuck. She made a small note in her log. The note said, "See, I told you." She had a lot of notes that said that. Ji-Yeon had been on the Council prisoner ship for 6 hours. She walked through the hold the way she walked through every room, like she had already decided what she thought and was checking to confirm it. The prisoners watched her: Council soldiers, a few officers, some administrative staff who had been on a secondary vessel when it was disabled. They were not mistreated. They had food, water, climate control. They were confused by this, which she found telling. Speaker Oren was in the 3rd section. She recognized him from the broadcast. Same formal robes, slightly less pressed now, sitting in the corner of a holding cell with the posture of a man who had spent his whole life at the top of things and was finding the bottom unfamiliar. He looked up when she stopped outside the cell. He said, "You aren't what we modeled." She looked at him. He had the tone of a man who was revising something large, not just his tactical assessment, but a whole framework he had built his career on. The model that said Earth was a high-aggression primitive species, manageable, predictable, a species that would be impressed by 5,000 ships the way that species always were. She looked at him the way you look at someone who has just been surprised that fire is hot. She didn't say anything. She moved on. She had other cells to review. Tail was in the secondary hold at 1400 when the young Council soldier asked him the question. Young by his species standard. Shorter than the others, lighter framed, with the look of someone who had enlisted because it seemed like the right thing to do, rather than because they were built for it. He had been quiet for most of the morning, but he had been watching Tail the whole time, with the focused attention of someone working up to something. "Why do you fight like this?" he said. Not how. Not what tactics. What weapons. What training program. Why? What was inside them that fought this way? Tail thought about it. He had a knife on his belt. He had carried a physical knife since the Mars siege because it was a habit from those years, from the corridors and the close work, and the thing you needed when the power went out and the rifle stopped. He hadn't stopped carrying it. He didn't think he ever would. He thought about Mars. He thought about the 2 years of it. He thought about the names he kept in a small notebook, and handwritten because a list that long deserved to be done by hand. We buried a lot of people, he said. He let it sit. We got tired of burying people. He didn't explain further. He didn't add anything. He went back to his post and left the soldier with it. The soldier sat with it for 6 hours without moving much. Tael noticed. He didn't say anything. Some things had to be absorbed at the pace they needed. By 1800, 3,200 council ships were sitting in a holding formation between Mars and the asteroid belt. Not trapped, they could move, but every direction they could move in was observed, covered, and managed. The formation held them like water holds a shape, not through force, but through the simple fact of being present on all sides. Wu Jin pulled the composite numbers. 1,200 council ships destroyed, 900 disabled, 3,200 contained. Earth's losses were on the other side of the ledger, significant, accurate, recorded with the same care Wu Jin brought to every number. He didn't look at those numbers for very long. He closed the file and looked across the command room at Junho, who was watching the holding formation on the tactical screen with the expression of a man looking at a thing he had planned for a very long time and was now seeing exist. Vethis understood it now. Wu Jin could see from the fleet's patterns. The moment the understanding had arrived, the way the ship movements changed, less directed, more careful, the body language of a force that had stopped trying to fight its way out and started trying to understand where it was. Vethis had come to deliver a lesson. He had received one instead. Wu Jin thought about saying this out loud. He decided against it. Some things didn't need to be said. They just needed to be over. The table was bolted to the floor of a decommissioned council frigate drifting in Earth's shadow, and nobody had claimed that as anything other than practical. Ji-yeon arrived first. She sat down, set 3 documents face down on the table, and folded her hands. She was not performing calm. She was simply calm, which was a different thing. And the distinction mattered to her in the same way that precision mattered to Wu Jin and geometry mattered to Mireille. Vethis arrived 4 minutes later, flanked by 2 aides and Speaker Orin, who wore the same formal robes and had the look of a man carrying something heavy inside his chest that he hadn't fully identified yet. Vethis sat down. He looked at Ji-yeon. He had 4 eyes and 7 centuries, and none of it helped him read her the way he could usually read a person across a table. He had expected fear, or pride, or the specific tight energy of a species that had just won something and was deciding how much to make of it. He knew all those looks. She did not have any of them. She looked like someone who had finished a very long task and was here to file the last piece of paperwork. He came in expecting to pay a bill. That was the honest way to say it. He had done this 9 times on the losing end when other campaigns went sideways and terms had to be negotiated. He knew how it worked. Territory, resources, tribute, symbolic concessions that meant more to the winning side than the losing one. He had a mental ledger open before he sat down. He was already calculating what Earth might want and what he could offer without fracturing his political standing back home. Ji-yeon picked up the first document, set it face up on the table in front of him. It was a list, 212 species, dates, methods, the record of every absorption the Council had performed in the last 2 centuries, the ones that were voluntary and the ones that had the word corrective somewhere in the paperwork. She didn't speak. She let him read. He read it. His expression did not change. But she watched his breathing, which she had always found more honest than faces, and his breathing changed. She watched it get careful, the way breathing gets when someone is controlling it. When he looked up, she was already reaching for the second document. The second document was Earth's terms. He read it twice. The first time fast, looking for the numbers, the territorial claim, the resource demand, the tribute schedule. The second time slower, because he hadn't found what he expected the first time, and he wanted to be sure he hadn't missed it. There was no territorial claim. There was no tribute, no resource demand, no seat at the council table for Earth, no veto power. No expanded sphere of influence. There was a single structural requirement. The Council would reform its membership framework to include mandatory representation for every species it had absorbed over the last 2 centuries. Not absorb species as junior members, not as client states, not as observers. Full representation, voting rights, real ones. Earth would maintain a fleet presence at 3 agreed points in Council space, not as occupiers, as guarantors. The thing that happened if the term stopped being followed. Not Earth in charge. Earth as consequence. Vethis looked up from the document. He looked at Ji-Yeon for a long time. "You don't want power," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "We have power," she said. "We want it to cost something." Junho heard the exchange from a comm relay on Titan Base. He was standing at the back of the room, not sitting, because some conversations needed to be heard on your feet. He said nothing. He thought about the wall in Busan, the one with the names on it. The long wall, the one he stood in front of every year for as long as it took. He thought about how the list of names had grown over his lifetime, and how he had, for a while, believed the growing would eventually stop. He thought about the locked file on his console that he had never showed anyone. He thought about Mireille, in her lab right now, still running numbers for a contingency he hoped they'd never use. Still ready, still at her desk. He listened to Ji-Yeon's voice through the relay and felt for the first time in 41 days something that wasn't exactly peace, but was in the same neighborhood. The third document was not what Oren expected. He was in the observer section, slightly behind and to the right of Vethis, in a chair that was technically neutral and practically felt like a defendant's chair. He had spent 6 hours in a holding cell and another 12 hours in a cabin on this frigate thinking about his model of humanity. The model he had built from survey data and first contact reports and cultural assessments prepared by people who had never met a human being. He had been very confident in that model. He was less confident now. Ji-Yeon slid the third document across the table. Vethis picked it up. Oren watched the Supreme Commander's expression shift, slowly, in the way that very large things shift, as he read. It was an archive, Earth's own history, 400 years of it. The wars, the atrocities, the things they had done to each other before they stopped doing them to each other and started carefully, slowly, doing other things instead. The Mars siege was in there. The fractured decades, the reunification, the failed reunification before the successful one. The list of every catastrophe they had survived and the list of every catastrophe they had caused. "So you understand," Ji-Yeon said, "that we're not doing this because we're better than you." The room was quiet. "We're doing this because we know exactly what you'll do next if someone doesn't." Oren sat with that. He sat with it for the remainder of the session, which was another 2 hours, and he sat with it on the shuttle back. And he was still sitting with it when the council ships began to move, some under their own power, some towed, some in configurations that would take months to fully repair. His model of humanity. She had taken it apart with 3 documents and 1 sentence. He thought about the second document in her reply, 3 weeks ago, the one his translation AI had flagged as anomalous. He had looked into the expression afterward. He had found a rough translation. "We have buried better than you," and we kept going. He looked out the shuttle window at the space where 1,200 council ships were not. He thought he understood it now. The last council ship cleared the system's edge at 0340 on the 41st day. Tail watched it from the viewport of Honol 7, which was repaired and running again, with a new wall panel at Junction 11A that was slightly different shade from the rest of the corridor, and probably always would be. He had his knife in his hand, not for any reason. Just somewhere to put his hands. Mireille shut down the weapons array, station by station, platform by platform, working through the sequence the way she had built it, methodically, in order, without rush. The last platform went cold at 0410. She was the only one left in the room. She sat in the dark for a moment with the screens off around her. She didn't say anything. She would be back at her desk in 2 hours. The contingency files were already open. Junho filed his debrief at 0500. 14 pages, damage reports, casualty tallies, tactical assessments, recommendations for forward posture, the kind of document that would be studied for a decade by people who hadn't been here. The last line read, "Recommend restructuring forward posture for next contact. There will be a next contact." He sent it. He lit a cigarette. The same brand he'd been smoking for 41 days. The brand he had quit 15 years ago and had apparently not quit as thoroughly as he thought. Through the porthole, Earth turned. Patient, blue, quiet in the way. Deep water is quiet. Not still, not finished, just moving at a pace that looked like stillness from far enough away. Wu Jin appeared in the doorway. Think they learned. Junho exhaled, watched the smoke go toward the ceiling. Enough to be careful. A beat. Not enough to stop. He said it the way you say a fact about weather. No bitterness. No resignation. Just the acknowledgement of a man who had asked the question knowing the answer, because some things deserve to be said out loud, even when you already knew. Wu Jin stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he went back to his station. There were numbers to run. There were always numbers to run.